Some years ago, Bjorn Lomborg, a young Danish statistician, published a book called The Skeptical Environmentalist. It became a bestseller and generated a lot of heat. Lomborg was attacked, abused, and accused of all manner of things, not because he denied the fact of global warming, in fact he affirmed it, but because, on his analysis, the devil and, he says, a lot of deviousness was contained in the details presented concerning the size of the problem and what were the most responsible steps to take in response to global warming. In animals, a movement is coordinated by a cluster of neurons in the spinal cord called the central contract pattern generator, CPG. This produces signals that drive muscles to contract rhythmically in a way that produces running or walking, depending on the pattern of pulse. A simple signal from the brain instructs the CPG to switch between modes such as going from a standstill to walking. Lawrence Stephen Lowry RBSRA was an English artist. Many of his drawings and paintings depict Pend Ledbury, Lancashire, where he lived and worked for more than 40 years, and also Salford and its surrounding areas. Lowry is famous for painting scenes of life in the industrial districts of northwest England in the mid-20th century. He developed a distinctive style of painting and is best known for his city landscapes, peopled with human figures often referred to as Matchstick Man. He painted mysterious unpopulated landscapes, brooding portraits, and the unpublished marionette works, which were only found after his death. Obviously, this is all relevant to your final assignment. So we're going to talk about it. So until today, we've gone through face-to-face interviews as the main sort of part of interviewing the window. Today we're going to have a look at going to use an email and why they work, why they don't necessarily work, and what are the challenges and some of the things that we need to be understanding, when we are completing such interpreters. So let's start with the foreign one. Obviously, there are a few benefits to them, and they are listed there up on that slide. It's obviously less stressful for those of you who might be a little bit anxious about interviewing. Now that story's been scotched, as only part of contingency planning. But it was a symptom of the dramatic turn of events in South Australia, and it flushed out other remarks from water academics and people like Tim Flannery, indicating that things were really much worse than had been foreshadowed, even earlier this year. So is Adelaide, let alone some whole regions of South Australia, in serious bother? Considering that the vast amount of its drinking water comes from the beleaguered Murray, something many of us outside the state may not have quite realized, is their predicament something we have to face up to as a nation? All around the world, significant parts of our cultural heritage are by pollution, neglect, carelessness, and greed. In learning the importance of our history, we come to understand the need to protect significant remains from the past so that future generations can come to understand their heritage. For a long time now, it's been a widely accepted and rarely questioned belief that a strong corporate culture goes hand in hand with success. However, a recent study has cast some doubt on this principle. After all, the authors of the report argue for culture. A company's build-up may be strong, but wrong. There is little point in every employee marching to the same tune if they are all marching in the wrong direction. Also, malaria is something that is a very complex disease with this complex life cycle. That means that if you're going to eliminate it, you have to be able to target cute parasites and humans. You have to be able to target parasites in the mosquitoes, that mosquito population. And so that requires a lot of resources. It requires really good planning and a health system across all these different levels. And so I think the political capital that you need for that, the educational infrastructure you need for that, the economic resources you need for that are quite a challenge. There are some common reasons to explain why early civilizations developed in different places and different times around the world. Each ancient civilization that has been discovered developed in places where there was a reliable water supply, usually on the banks of major rivers, and where the soil was fertile enough to grow crops. We can gain an accurate knowledge of the past only if we know the age of the different sources being investigated. Without this information, historians and archaeologists could not be sure of the order in which different areas were settled, used and abandoned. They would not always be sure if a particular object was real or forgery. Historians can represent events that have happened in past centuries on a timeline, showing the 4 major periods of human history. A timeline is a good way to help us get history into perspective. It shows events from the past in a clear chronological order, that is, from the earliest to the latest event. Archaeologists look for clues that indicate that an area is worth digging up. Clues may come from the writings of someone in the past who has described the existence of a particular town or burial site. Sometimes sites are accidentally discovered during excavation for the construction of buildings, roads, dams, or railways. Ebola virus, the bacteria that causes plague, a pandemic strain of flu, if any of these pathogens could be turned into bioweapons by terrorists or rogue nation-states, they would threaten humanity. Most life scientists have little awareness of biosecurity issues, according to a National Academies report released today. And it says there are multiple shortcomings in the systems designed to stop potentially risky research from being published. A new process for 3D printing things could pave the way for lighter, faster aircraft that potentially fly further on the same amount of fuel. Today's airplanes are held together with thousands of metal rivets and fasteners. That's because the lightweight but strong aluminum alloys used for their frames are considered unwieldable. Try to weld them and you get a phenomenon called hot cracking, in which the finished alloy weakens and fractures as it cools. This and other adverse welding effects also stand in the way of 3D printing high-strength aluminum alloy parts. When researchers have tried, the resulting laser-fused mass flakes away at the welding area like a stale biscuit. Popular ride-sharing firm Uber has had its license to operate in London revoked in a surprise move by the city's regulator. There were multiple reasons for the decision. TfL cited the company's approach to reporting criminal offences. In August, a senior officer within London's Metropolitan Police Service wrote to TfL about Uber's slowness to report a passenger's accusation that her driver had sexually assaulted her. TfL said it was also concerned about how Uber obtained medical certificates and criminal records checks for drivers. The straw that broke the camel's back may have been the company's Greyball software, an internal application that Uber may have used to block regulators' oversight of the Uber app. All earthquakes look the same when they start, making it unlikely we will be able to predict which will cause the most devastation from early observations. Early warning systems rely on seismometers picking up tremors and sounding the alarm for nearby cities before major shaking starts. Even a few seconds warning can make a lot of difference, both for individual people and for organizations like hospitals. For example, Mexico's early warning system gave everyone a 10 to 15 second heads up before Tuesday's magnitude 7.1 earthquake. Another arm of the United States government was the FSA, the Farm Security Administration, and they had a peculiar task, because in addition to the depression, which had obviously hit farmers quite hard because suddenly the material that they were producing wasn't really as value, yet their costs for producing it were exactly the same, they were hit not only that but also by another problem, which was the Dust Bowl. And the Dust Bowl was this terrible broad that hit the American West and Southwest especially, and caused terrible economic problems for those farmers. I'm going to argue that the tremendous increases in productivity that we associate with the Industrial Revolution originate not so much from changes in science or technology or new inventions, where England was far from unique, as from changes in attitudes towards morality, towards what constituted the good. Attitudes towards property, which became in England individuals long before it did on the continent. Attitudes toward the proper role of government. And together, these attitudes constitute much of what the Luddites were protesting against. We are trying to understand the locomotion of one of our closest living relatives, which is the orangutan, and also the locomotion of all of the apes and the common ancestor of humans and the other apes. And in that area, we have had a big problem traditionally, and that we know a lot about how they move around the forest. I've been out to the forest and spent a year recording the different types of locomotion they use, but we have no idea about the energetic cost of how they move around the forest and the solutions that they find to problems of moving around the canopy. And what we're doing here is using the park or athletes as an analogy for a large-bodied ape moving around a complex environment and getting them to move around in the course that we've made that they've never seen before. And we're going to record their energetic expenditure while they're doing it. Asteroid collisions can be, just ask the dinosaurs, but they also bring key ingredients for life. Super-Earths can draw them to nearby worlds. Super-Earths, planets that are up to 10 times more massive than Earth, might play billiards with planetary systems. New simulations suggest that if a super-Earth existed in our own solar system, say between Venus and the Earth, far more asteroids would collide with us. But that isn't necessarily a bad thing, if the timing is right. Understanding the effect of these massive planets on others nearby could help direct the search for life on exoplanets. It's tough to pick a familiar face out of a crowd, but focusing on a known voice in a noisy room is easy. And a new study scanned volunteers' brains to look at how we solve the so-called cocktail party problem. The work is in the journal Nature. Researchers recorded the activity of the subjects' cerebral cortexes while playing them sentences spoken by different voices. First, the subjects listened to individual sentences and reported key features of each one. Then, they heard two different sentences played at the same time, but had to listen to and recall details from only one voice. Each voice drew a particular response from the auditory cortex. And even with an extra sentence playing simultaneously, researchers saw that the cortex responded specifically to the voice that the subject was focusing on. This finding indicates that our brains process sound based not only on the audio input they receive, but also on our listening goals. And it could lead to speech recognition systems that are accurate in crowds, even at a cocktail party. Obese people have higher risks for diabetes, heart disease, arthritis, and injuries in car accidents? Yes, in part because they're far less likely to wear a seat belt. That's the finding of a study out of the University of Buffalo that will be presented at an upcoming meeting of the Society for Academic Emergency Medicine in Chicago. The researchers analyzed data in the National Fatality Analysis Reporting System of the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. The study included a third of a million drivers involved in fatal crashes. 2 years ago, the research group found that morbidly obese people were 56% more likely to die in a car crash than normal weight car occupants. The new study revealed that drivers of normal weight are 67% more likely to wear a seatbelt than are obese drivers, which could account for at least part of the increased death risk. The researchers hypothesize that overweight people find belts uncomfortable and difficult to buckle. A weight loss program can address the problem in the long run. An inexpensive seat belt extension can solve it today. Does your puppy turn his nose up at his own chow because he wants some of whatever it is that you're having? A new study finds that, when it comes to food, dogs recognize human social signals about what's good. The work is in the journal Public Library of Science 1. Researchers let pet dogs choose between 2 plates, one with a single piece of food and the other with 6 pieces. Unsurprisingly, the animals generally went for the larger portion. But when a human being showed a clear liking for the smaller plate, the canines likewise went for the skimpier choice. The dogs apparently recognized and responded to the human's social cues. And not all cues were equally effective. When the human approached but did not touch the smaller portion, dogs ignored the attention-drawing gesture. For a social signal to influence behavior, it had to demonstrate intention.